the evidence behind why Bakugou, specifically an adult version of the character, was the second user of One For All, and why this theory makes perfect sense. I posted this theory on Twitter the other day, and it literally blew up, with 90% of the replies telling me how it exploded their minds in several different directions. And it was also pretty cool to have some big YouTubers like Truth Hero chiming in with their opinions, even though he was wrong. Sorry bro. The core of this theory actually hinges on understanding 4 characters other than Bakugou, so let's start with them so you'll understand the context. And this is super important, so even if you think you know these characters, just believe me, you need to listen the whole way. So to start with, we have the brother of All For One, a guy with a righteous heart who supposedly had no quirk. This character was nothing like his older brother, so much so that All For One tried to make him submit by forcefully giving his little brother a stock power piling quirk. This would of course then go on to become the power known as One For All. And for those of you that don't know, One For All was created due to the stock power piling quirk combining with the brother's secret quirk that no one knew about. This secret power allowed the brother to transfer quirks to other people, but only if they ate his DNA, and whilst they were doing that, he had to simultaneously want his quirk to be transferred. Now moving on. The next character you need to know about is Shigaraki, and at this point I'm going to go into some big spoiler territory for the manga, so if you really don't want to know any spoilers, then this is the end of the video for you, my friend. Currently in the manga, Shigaraki is undergoing an operation from Dr. Ujiko that will give him an immense power of some kind, and the doctor says on this page that once the operation is complete, everything will be within Shigaraki's grasp, including One For All. Remember, up until this point, One For All could never be taken by force, as it can only be transferred when the person holding it wants it to be passed on. And from this wording in the manga, it's pretty obvious that Shigaraki will somehow have a means of taking One For All by force in the near future. The third character we need to be aware of is Shigaraki's grandmother, Nana Shimura. She was the 7th holder of One For All, and during her hero days, she mentioned that the feelings of previous One For All users can be recorded inside One For All. Essentially what that means is that the spirits of One For All users live on inside the quirk, and that future users can see the memories of previous users. This has been demonstrated in the manga when Deku saw the memories of the first user of One For All and then interacted with him. And finally, the last character that we need to understand is Eri, a character who's been introduced in Season 4. Eri is a 6-year-old girl who has a powerful quirk called Rewind, and I actually did a video breaking this quirk down in more detail, but here's just a high-level overview. Eri can manipulate time on an individual scale, meaning she can rewind living things back into a previous state. So for example, if she touched you, she could probably rewind you back into a baby, or rewind you so far that you never even existed. Now it's important to remember that not only is Eri just 6 years old, but she has never once in her life trained her quirk. Consequently, whilst we've only seen her apply this rewind quirk on an individual scale, it's not a stretch to say that with practice and focus, she could be able to rewind on a much bigger scale. If Deku can achieve such rapid growth on his first day of meeting Gran Torino, could you imagine if Eri, a 6-year-old child, had a few years to train her quirk and apply it in different ways? It's just something to think about. But with all that explained, let's get into the main crux of this theory of how Bakugou is the second user of One For All. So, to start with, during a certain arc in the manga, Deku essentially went inside the core of One For All and was able to see the spirits of its previous users. Now when we zoom in at the end here, we see 2 characters who've been intentionally blurred out by Horikoshi, one of whom will immediately catch your attention. I mean, it's not even just the hair, look at the gauntlets on his arm. This clearly looks like a silhouette of a more grown up version of Bakugou. And let's be real, if I showed you this silhouette in a totally different context and asked you which character you think this is, come on, there's no way you're not saying Bakugou. Horikoshi is a writer who has meaning behind every panel he writes. The fact that he's intentionally blurring out this silhouette should tell you something. He wouldn't make one of them so obviously look like Bakugou if there wasn't some kind of meaning behind it. But I know what you're thinking. How could this be Bakugou, given that Deku was in fact looking at the previous users of One For All? Well, my friends, the answer essentially boils down to this man, All For One's brother. Imagine this. Like him, you possessed a quirk that allowed you to transfer quirks, but you could only ever use this power if someone eats your DNA, like a strand of hair, and you simultaneously have to will them to have your quirk. Being completely rational, There is no scenario in which you ever just happen to discover that, not even by accident. In the world of My Hero Academia, there are no manuals, there is no book that tells you how to use your own individual power, and on that basis, the notion that All For One's brother just happened to discover that he could transfer quirks if he wanted it to be passed on while someone was eating his DNA is quite frankly impossible. Even the master of quirks himself, All For One, believed that his brother was quirkless. That's partly the reason why he gave his brother the stockpiling power in the first place. No one knew this guy had a transfer quirk, and the nature of the quirk meant that no one would ever discover it at random either. But the main point is this. The only way the brother could have found out is if someone told him it was there. Nana Shimura was told by her predecessor, she then told All Might, and All Might told Deku. And can we all remember how shocked Deku's face was when he heard that he had to eat a piece of All Might's DNA? It's just not something that people would naturally think to do. So with all that on the table, how did the first user of One For All find out that he could transfer quirks? There is not a single person alive in his time, not even his older brother, who was aware of this power and could have told him. The answer has been staring us in the face. Bakugou, one of only a handful of people to ever know of One For All, was sent back in time by an older version of Eri who had mastered her rewind quirk to show the first user that he could transfer quirks, thus becoming the second user himself and completing the fixed time loop. And he doesn't change the past by doing this either, because he always was the second user. And before we properly dive into this, let me just briefly explain the theoretical concept of a fixed time loop. This is a concept in physics that is quite similar to a self-fulfilling prophecy. In a time loop like this, a sequence of events is triggered by one specific event. But that specific event that caused everything to happen was actually the result of someone time traveling back and causing that event. But this is where it gets really trippy, because the person who went back in time to cause that event and, set everything in motion, only did so because that event had already occurred in their time. That's what we're dealing with here. Bakugou lived in a world where One For All had always existed, but was then sent back in time to tell the first user how to use it, but he was only able to do this because One For All had always existed, and therefore he had the knowledge necessary to go back and tell the first user. But anyway, with the time travel explanation out of the way, I'm going to explain to you how everything ties in together. We established earlier that Shigaraki is getting a power-up in the manga that will allow him to somehow take One For All. On the basis that Horikoshi is not a writer who just puts stuff like that in there for no reason and just to troll you, Shigaraki will at some point in the future take One For All from Deku.